Let's start here, Evan, with the AFC Baltimore Ravens. You gave the Ravens a B minus, kind of to me like a classic Ravens draft where there's a lot of trench guys, just like the Eagles and the Ravens. They're always fortifying offensive line, defensive line. Ravens hit secondary early here. You gave them a B minus, Evan. What did you think of Ravens draft this year?
Yeah, a lot of draft picks in general too. I mean, they took like what 10 or 11 guys. They typically stock up on complementary. I'm sorry,
Compensatory picks.
compensatory
Yeah.
draft picks. No team has done a better job since compensatory picks began at compiling them than the Ravens. The Ravens started this one off with Malachi Starks out of Georgia. And if you look what they're doing in the secondary, like their secondary has a chance to be special. Last year, they hit on Nate Wiggins in the first round. Marlon Humphrey's coming back healthy. Kyle Hamilton is, one of the best defensive backs in the league. And they retained Ardarius Washington, who had a nice season for them as a restricted free agent. So their secondary looks really, really good on paper right now. And then Mike Green out of Marshall, who led college football in sacks this past year, but had some fairly concerning off-field stuff. I mean, people that, study these players for a living thought that he could be a top 20 pick.
Yep.
No problem. And they got him at 57. And I think that that's a good bet for the Ravens because of their culture. And he also fills a big need because the Ravens have really been relying on mercenaries at pass rusher really for years and having success to an extent with them. But this guy gives them a potential building block coming off the edge. And then Emory Jones in the third round. He's got length. He started for 3 years in the SEC. The Ravens didn't really have a screaming offensive line need, but I think he can end up being a starter. I mean, he's got the length, the athleticism, and the starting experience that teams look for.
I mean, early in the year last year, I thought Ravens defense, secondary specifically, was one to attack. Then they kind of switched position and got Kyle Hamilton going, and they were like really tough to throw on. Now you add Malachi Starks in here at 27 overall to the secondary, really talented secondary like Evan talked about. My initial gut is for like DFS purposes, Ravens secondary is going to be one to actually avoid coming up this year rather than one to attack like it was at the beginning of last season. Let's go to the Buffalo Bills. Oh boy, this one, I don't know if you saw this interview this morning, Evan, on Buffalo radio. Billy Beane calls in and just goes off on the host for suggesting that they should have gotten Josh Allen more weaponry in this draft. They made a bunch of picks here, did the Bills. They did not take a single wide receiver until round 7 in Maryland wide receiver Caden Prather. Billy Beane did not want to hear it, man. He did not want to hear. I'm sorry, Brandon Beane did not want to hear that they should have drafted a wide receiver. Evan gave them a C minus. Evan, what do you think of Bills draft?
Yeah, and I put in my write-up, I was very disappointed that GM Brandon Beane didn't prioritize upgrading Josh Allen's pedestrian wide receiver core. I mean, they know that this is an issue because they gave away what would have been the 94th overall pick to get Amari Cooper for half of the season last year. So, and like that didn't work out. I think that maybe just the board didn't fall the way that they wanted. I mean, and then like, the late round receivers, I mean, those guys almost never work out. I mean, so they didn't get any receivers in the early rounds, and then they passed on him in the late rounds. And I think that he like got defensive because he knows that is an issue. They told us that is an issue last year. And maybe he's trying to convince himself that it was okay. I mean, I like some of the dudes that they came away with. Maxwell Hairston, Kentucky cornerback, putting him opposite Christian Benford. That number 2 cornerback spot has been a big issue for Baltimore. And then you saw when Benford missed time last year, I mean, their secondary can fall apart. Maxwell Hairston can really run and cover, and he can play man coverage. So they're not always relying on zone. And Benford can play man coverage too. I mean, we saw him line up often against number one wide receivers last year. So that really helps.
Yeah.
Landon Jackson, a lot of people had him mocked in the first round. The Bills got him at number 70. Joey Bosa is on a 1-year sort of trial deal and certainly might not be a part of the long-term plan there. In the second round, they got a big space eater out of South Carolina, TJ Sanders, to help against the run. And they came back and took another cornerback, Jordan Hancock, out of Ohio State. And a guy that a lot of people, they took three cornerbacks. They took Dorian Strong as well out of Virginia Tech. He is a zone corner, but they clearly identified cornerback as a need, defensive line as a need, and that's where they focused their draft capital. But I really wanted to see them take a wide receiver, a guy who could stretch the field. I don't know. Maybe they'll think about bringing back Amari Cooper. I mean, I don't like there are not many options out there right now.
So the current starting group at wide receiver for the Bills is going to be Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and Josh Palmer. That's not going to scare anyone. What Brandon Beane was trying to say, which, I agree with Evan, he was getting overly defensive, clearly. He used the word bitch like 6 times. But anyways, he was trying to say that we're among the league leaders in points. We led all teams in points last year. The way that we lose in the playoffs every year is the same way. We can't get off the field against Patrick Mahomes. And I get that to some degree, but Josh Allen doesn't mean he can just do it all himself every game, every year. He certainly needs help here. And like Evan said, there are not a lot of options out there. There's Keenan Allen is out there. There are Amari Cooper's out there. I'm concerned both of those guys are kind of out of gas, and the NFL kind of feels the same way. I will note they did not take a running back either. There was some speculation they could take a running back given the James Cook contract situation. James Cook sounds like he's threatening a holdout if he doesn't get more money. They do have Ray Davis also, though, but they did not address running back here in this draft. Let's go to the Cincinnati Bengals. They only made 6 picks here. Evan gave them a D+. I thought it was a good run out for Chase Brown. They did take a running back, Taj Brooks, in the 6th round, but overall, offseason's been a great run out for our hero from last year, Chase Brown. Evan, any thoughts on your D+ here for the Bengals draft?
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals, everybody knew that the Bengals needed defensive players. They just need talent on that side of the ball. They fired Lou Anarumo, and they needed help. And, they started off their draft with 2 guys on the defensive side of the ball, Shamar Stewart and Demetrius Knight. Shamar Stewart he didn't have any sack production at Texas. I mean, you're looking for sack production from defensive ends, from edge players, and he didn't have it at Texas A&M. He did have pretty high pressure rates. He's a really good athlete, but man, I mean, finishing. This is the 17th overall pick in the draft. Like, you want your edge players to be able to finish, and he did not do that. And then Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina, 49th overall pick, he'll be 25.5 when the season starts. And got like linebacker gurus thought that he was sort of like a project. So that, I guess they hit the right positions, but I'm very questionable on those individual players. And then I did like in the 3rd round, they got Dylan Fairchild. That long time weakness in Cincinnati has been left guard. And I think that they might have got an immediate starter in Dylan Fairchild out of Georgia. You mentioned Taj Brooks. Our buddy Matt Waldman, we had him on the show a couple years ago, and he loves studying running backs. And I think he had Taj Brooks as the number 1 running back in this draft. I mean, behind Genty. He loves this guy. He has really good tackle breaking numbers. He's a 6th round pick. He might not even make the team. Okay. But I think he is a guy to keep in mind, and he could eventually make Zach Moss irrelevant at very least.
Yeah, I mean, we're up to 28 overall in our initial underdog ranks on Chase Brown. And, that's going to sound...
I think he should be higher.
I was going to say, that's going to sound aggressive to people, but I could see him going even higher. And, yeah, like Evan said, when Evan's first 150 comes out, I would not be surprised if Chase Brown's even higher than that. We're just giving Pirine some pass down work, Zach Moss some work, and Taj Brooks some work also. And so you don't have, like, the full on Chase Brown. But what we saw them from a usage basis on Chase Brown last year, handle massive workloads. They're winning games, and he was doing really, really strong work with it. So I feel good about 28 overall at a minimum on Chase Brown. Let's go to the Cleveland Browns, who obviously made the big surprising deal on draft day, moving down to number 5, passing on their chance to get Travis Hunter. Evan gave them a D. Evan, thoughts on Browns draft?
Yeah, and I usually really like the way that the Browns draft. They're very analytically minded. I think that they, They maximized their picks. They did in this move down from number 2 to number 5. They did get the Jaguars' first round pick next year, and that could be a quarterback. I think we're going to be optimistic about the Jags this season, but they year over year they disappoint and they tend to lose a lot of games. So the Browns are essentially making a bet against the Jaguars by acquiring their 2026 first rounder. Mason Graham is a guy that I heard that they had really, really high grades on, but they also passed up an opportunity to take the best player and athlete in the draft in Travis Hunter. So, and then at the top of I was surprised by this. So then 3 of their next 5 picks were on 2 running backs and an off-ball linebacker. And these players are good. The off-ball linebacker is Carson Schlesinger. We talked about him potentially being a first-round pick. He was the 33rd overall pick in the draft. He's going to be a good player, I think. And then Quinshaw Judkins, I think, is going to be, their power back. And then Dylan Sampson, who Mike Renner loved, will be that Mike Renner compared him to Brian Westbrook. Those 2 backs really complement each other. But for an analytics-minded team to be doing this with the multiple running backs and off-ball linebacker at 33 overall, I don't know. Is someone else pulling the strings here? Definitely when they got Shedeur Sanders, I think that was an owner-generated move. We know that Jimmy Haslam will put his fingerprints on things that the Browns do. And then I'm sure that you saw the pictures of Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry sitting there, and when they announced Shedeur Sanders, they're like, we had to do this. And they wound up drafting 2 quarterbacks. And, they traded for Kenny Pickett. I'm sure they're like, well, we traded for Kenny Pickett. And they have Joe Flacco. So, look, they don't have a solution there. But, one of those guys isn't going to make the team, because they drafted Dylan Gabriel before Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah.
So, it didn't really – this whole thing was just confusing. The draft class for the Browns was confusing to me.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, and I definitely agree on the Haslam thing with Shedeur for sure. There, just really, really rough overall. It looked like it was like a funeral hello when Forrest
and then Harold Fannin, who I kind of like, but he's not going to be a factor in year 1. Like that's almost guaranteed because of David Njoku. And then David Njoku is a free agent after this year.
Yep.
But you want to keep David Njoku.
Yeah.
He's not like super old or anything like that. There's no way that Harold Fannin is going to be as good as David Njoku. So it's just, you can't say that, oh, well, he's the eventual replacement for David Njoku. That'd be saying a lot. I was confused.
Yeah. The Fannin thing strikes me a lot as the Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews thing, where I really like Harold Fannin. He's an awesome pass catcher, just like I thought Isaiah Likely was, but there's always going to be some blockage here. It looks like with David Njoku, but we'll see what they do when he's a free agent next year. And yeah, the Judkins thing, the kind of back that Judkins is, I felt like they could have gotten that much later. And that's like the process stuff and a lot of good running backs ended up going 4th, 5th, 6th round. They took Judkins 36th overall. And that's a steep price to pay for a guy that maybe
really early.
True.
That's like where Nick Chubb went.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. The actual lack of position scarcity actually in this draft led to a bunch of really good running backs being pushed down the board.
Yeah.
Whereas the Browns bit early. I didn't like this one.
Okay.
And they're a team that needed a good draft.
Yep. Broncos. Broncos, I think, wanted to get up for Genty. But at 20, they end up passing on the running backs. They take Jahdae Barron there. Evan ended up with a B on them. They did get their running back in RJ Harvey at 60 overall, which the RJ Harvey is like the biggest discussion point right now in fantasy for Dynasty and all that. Evan, sounds like you liked Broncos draft. B is a pretty good grade here. What do you think of what they did?
Yeah, I did. And I've listened to some podcasts where they were talking about where other analysts were talking about their draft grades, and this is not a well-liked draft. But I'll tell you what, I love how they resisted Omarion Hampton or whoever at number 20, and they took Jahdae Barron because this dude is a baller. I could have seen him going higher than this. He's going to play slot corner for them and be a playmaker. He won the Thorpe Award as the best defensive back in the nation this past year. He's got ball skills. He's relatively big. I mean, he's 5'11". He ran 4.39 at the combine. And I mean, all of a sudden, Riley Moss had a really nice season opposite Patrick Surtain. Last year, Surtain was Defensive Player of the Year, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. So you got the Defensive Player of the Year, a guy in Riley Moss coming off a breakout season, and now the number 20 pick in your cornerback core. I mean, that is going to be a strong, strong secondary and something that they can rely on. RJ Harvey, we talked about him with Field Yates. Field Yates loves RJ Harvey. A bunch of people love RJ Harvey. I think that Sean Payton might internally compare RJ Harvey to Alvin Kamara. I think that he jumps right in and becomes their lead back. He's going to go early in fantasy drafts. They've got a really good offensive line, too, and they're bringing back everybody. Pat Bryant is this wide receiver, Illinois, is the guy that most other analysts are like, no. And I couldn't find anybody that thought that Pat Bryant would even go in the second round. Sean Payton does have a history of maximizing big receivers. I just, I don't know. It seemed like a reach to me. And then Savion Jones, I liked him late in the third round as a because he fits the Vance Joseph type of defense. The Broncos had a really good defense last year, and it just got better in this draft, especially with Jahdae Barron up top.
Yeah, I mean, the secondary stuff, adding to a position of strength, right? Broncos were already second in the NFL in yards per pass attempt allowed, and then they add Jahdae Barron here at 20. I mean, they're certainly going to be in our DVP stuff, a spot that's going to be very tough for wide receivers and quarterbacks. Yeah, we'll talk plenty more about the RJ Harvey thing when we get to the landing spots podcast, but it's hard to come up with a better landing spot for RJ Harvey here than Denver. He's competing with guys like Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime, Blake Watson, handpicked here by Sean Payton. So I don't think it's going to be workhorse. Like people say it's too early for RJ Harvey. I don't think it's going to be like workhorse type situation for him. I think Sean Payton is always going to use multiple backs, but it's still a really exciting landing spot. And our first ranking, our first underdog rankings were all the way up at 65 overall here on RJ Harvey, right around Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, James Conner, guys like that. So yeah, very exciting. Let's go to Houston Texans. Got a B+ from Evan here, despite not even having a first round pick. Evan, what do you think of Texans draft?
Well, they did have a first round pick, and then they traded it to the Giants.
Yep.
Which, and we'll talk about that trade more when we go into the NFC. But I think it's clear what happened. They were hoping to stick and pick at 25. Guys like Tyler Booker are going off the board at number 12. Donovan Jackson goes right before them to the Vikings at 24. And the Texans are like, all right, we got to get out of here. They didn't even get like a big haul to move down. They moved from 25 to 34. And they essentially just got an extra third rounder this year and an extra third rounder next year. I still like that move. And then they came away with, they're building twin towers at wide receiver now with Jaden Higgins and Nico Collins. And then they went and got Jaden Higgins' college teammate at Iowa State, Jalen Noel, who was a super, super explosive player. And I think he's going to play right away. I think Jaden Higgins will start opposite Nico Collins as a rookie. And I think that Jalen Noel will be given every opportunity to win the slot receiver job, maybe push John Mechie off the roster. I would not count on seeing Tank Dell at all in 2025. And everybody thought that they would take an offensive lineman in the first round. And I think that they wanted to. They wound up taking one in the second round, who was Arante Ursary, Minnesota offensive tackle. At one point, Rap Sheet was talking about that he thought that Ursary could potentially slip into the back end of the first round. So that seems like pretty good value there. Arante Ursary, Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins starting off the draft. And then they took a couple of defensive backs. They got a running back, Woody Marks, out of UFC, who could be, he'll compete with Damian Pierce to be the number 2 back right away behind Joe Mixon.
Yeah. My thing with the Texans, like I was looking to see how are they helping CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud went from 18.3 fantasy points per game as a rookie to just 12.9 last season. Everyone blamed Slowick. Everyone blamed the offensive line. Everyone blamed the wide receiver injuries. They replaced Slowick with Nick Caley. Okay, they have three new offensive linemen, maybe four. They have three new wide receivers: Jaden Higgins, Christian Kirk, Jalen Noel. So I want to be optimistic on CJ Stroud. I'm not certain that the talent level has been elevated that much, but it's just at least it's been turned over a ton, and you're gonna get a new scheme here out of Slowick. So what clearly didn't work last year, at least they've like completely overhauled it. So
One
yeah.
other thing to note is that the Texans, following, they moved on from Laramie Tunsil, and they made this deal to move down the board with the Giants. They now have extra second, third, and fourth round picks in next year's draft.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the way that they are building for the present and for the future, and that's why I gave them a good grade, B plus.
Okay. Indianapolis Colts also got a B plus from Evan. They stood pat at 14 overall. Took Penn State tight end Tyler Warren as the second tight end off the board. Evan, what did you think of what the Colts did over the weekend?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, it's a huge win when the guy that you need and definitely want and won the freaking Mackey Award and, is just the perfect addition to your offense. And Tyler Warren, he's going to help in every phase of the game, falls into your lap at 14. I mean, they had to be overjoyed, the Colts. And then JT Tuamalu out of Ohio State. I mean, he was a first team Big Ten player in each of his three final seasons in college. Super, super productive. They have pumped a ton of talent into their defensive line over the past few years, including acquiring, DeForest Buckner, and they should be really, really strong up front. Um, and then they went and addressed another need with Justin Wally out of Minnesota, cornerback. I think that he might be a slot corner. We saw Kenny Moore, who's been a really good, like a Pro Bowl player for them for years, take a step back last year. And then they take chances on athletes. That's what Chris Ballard does. I actually kind of like the flyer that they took on Riley Leonard out of Notre Dame. Riley Leonard has a lot of flaws as a passer, but he is an awesome athlete. I think that they could use him. I've kind of thought that he should play tight end, bulk up a little bit and play tight end. He's that kind of like a tackle breaker, and he's got that kind of speed. But I kind of like that addition for them in the sixth round. Chris Ballard loves athletes.
It's just funny that they have three quarterbacks on their roster who can't really throw: Anthony
Right.
Richardson, Daniel Jones, and Riley
Right.
Leonard. It's like
It
so.
is true.
I mean, none of this stuff's going to matter if no one can complete a pass, and like I'm still leaving the light on for Anthony Richardson. Maybe that is too wild of a take. I think Evan expects Daniel Jones to make more starts, I believe, than Anthony Richardson this year. But, we'll see. But none of this stuff's going to matter if they don't solve the quarterback position. So,
And then we should mention DJ Giddens,
yeah.
who was a player that a lot of analysts like. He went in the fifth round. He can really play in the passing game. He can run, and he's not particularly small. I think he's a really good complement to Jonathan Taylor.
Okay, nice. Jaguars made the move of the draft going up to number 2 overall to get Travis Hunter. They also took a running back that the fantasy community is certainly very excited about in Tootin out of Virginia Tech. Evan gave them a C plus overall. Evan, what do you think of Jaguars draft?
Yeah, so that move that the Jaguars made for Travis Hunter to move 3 spots essentially ultimately cost them a second rounder this year because they wound up they're not drafting the second round this year
Yeah.
because they gave that to the Browns, and then a first rounder next year. But see, to me, like I think that was a worthwhile gamble. I think that Travis Hunter is worth that. I think he was the best prospect, the best athlete in the draft, and I mean, I'm just real excited about the potential. Like, will this finally be the year where where Trevor Lawrence, you know, delivers on all the hype that he entered the league with? I think he's definitely got the weapons for it. Caleb Ransaw was a guy that some people liked as a it seemed like people couldn't decide on what position he would play in the NFL. His combine measurables were those of like a boundary corner, but some people thought that he needs to move to the slot. Some people thought that he needs to move to safety. And so that's probably why he was available in the third round, because he tore up the combine. Wyatt Millum out of West Virginia, offensive tackle, huge, 6'7", 313, but he only has 32-inch arms. Those are short arms for a guy who's 6'7". That's why he lasts until the end of the third round. And then, Bashul Tutin. Look, Trevor Etienne essentially lost his starting job last year. This new regime has no ties to Tank Bigsby, who did have a nice season running the ball last year, but he's got a history of fumbling problems. He has really not been playable in the passing game. So Bashul Tutin is going to get an opportunity, no question. And then Jack Kaiser, saw him play a lot of games at Notre Dame. Productive tackler, extremely productive tackler, team leader, got him at pick 104 in the fourth round.
Yeah, and if you've heard James Gladstone, new Jaguars tight end, talk about Bashul Tutin, like it's hard not to kind of get excited. Tutin ran a 4.32 at 5'9", 206 at the combine. As Evan said, Etienne's on his way out. This is also the final year of Etienne's contract, and Tutin kind of complements, I think, what Tank Bigsby does well. So yeah, that was a super interesting pick to track. I will say, a lot of pressure from the fantasy community on Trevor Lawrence here. We are at 12 overall on Brian Thomas, and we were at 44 overall on Travis Hunter. So you're asking Trevor Lawrence to support both of these guys as top 45 picks here, BTJ and Travis Hunter. I like it. I know I pushed us to move Travis Hunter's ranking up as much as we could stomach it, and we're up at 44 overall right now on Travis Hunter. Quotes out of Jacksonville. Sounds like the guesses are roughly 80% of his snaps will come at the wide receiver position overall. All right. Let's go to Kansas City Chiefs. Got a C- here from Evan. Took the medical risk in round one here with the tackle Josh Simmons. I believe it was a patellar injury for Josh Simmons. But yeah, Evan, what do you think of what the Chiefs did?
Yeah, and they started off their draft making a trade with the Eagles, where they got a fifth round. The Chiefs got a fifth round pick just for moving down one spot.
Yeah, it was weird.
So, I mean, I like that. And then there were people that thought that Josh Simmons could have been like a top 10 pick if he had not ruptured his patellar tendon last year. They can bring him along. They can bring him along slowly. I mean, this was like the perfect fit for Josh Simmons because they can bring him along slowly. They've got their interior offensive line set, and they signed Jalen Moore in free agency to play left tackle, and they've got Jawan Taylor coming back. I think that Josh Simmons, maybe by midseason, if something happens to Moore or Taylor, he could be a starter, but I think he'll definitely be a starter in 2026. And then the rest of the guys I just wasn't overly impressed by. Omar Norman Lott is a guy that is like a space eater. This undersized gap shooter. He came off the bench throughout his college career. They took him in the second round. Wasn't even a starter at Tennessee. And then Jalen Royals, I think, is really interesting out of Utah State. This is a guy, it's going to be interesting to see how he does in training camp because he's super explosive, 4.42 at 6 foot 205. Just want to see how he uses them. I think the playing time is still up for grabs in the Chiefs wide receiver core. Jalen Royals, really intriguing prospect in the fourth round.
Well, yeah, and we're trying to work on projections for, is Rashee Rice going to be fully healthy? Sounds like yes. Is Rashee Rice going to be suspended? Doesn't sound like for that long, but they also brought back Marquise Brown, and of course they had Xavier Worthy breakout last season. There was some speculation Chiefs could target running back a little bit earlier here in this draft. They did not until the 7th round, so pretty good run out here for Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, and they also added Elijah Mitchell this offseason to the backfield, did the Chiefs. Let's go to the Raiders. Speaking of teams that were overjoyed to just stick where they were and let the player they want fall to them, I felt like that was the case for the Raiders, who stuck at 6 overall. Felt like they were targeting Ashton Genty the entire time. They get Ashton Genty, end up with an A- from Evan. Rare A tier here for Evan on the Las Vegas Raiders. What do you like so much about what the Raiders did?
I love what the Raiders did. And I mean, usually I think we kind of frown at teams that go balls to the wall for running backs, but I think that there were maybe 6 actual blue chip players in this draft, and Ashton Genty was like number 3 among those 6. And he's going to like the perfect landing spot to just maximize, just use the crap out of him. I mean, he could lead the NFL in touches as a rookie under Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll. You know, he's gonna he's gonna compete for the league lead in snap percentages among running backs. I think that's for sure. So I think that he's absolutely worth the number 6 overall pick in a draft like this. Jack Besh, I think, real interesting. He was like a field stretcher in college, but I think that people expect him to be like a short to intermediate weapon in the NFL. They got him at number 58. They needed help at receiver. Darian Porter is super interesting. If you see his highlights, he's a total freak of nature. He's a Pete Carroll corner through and through. 6'3", 195, super long arms. Ran a 4.340 at the combine. I think that he was a really, really fun pick. And then they made a couple of trades down with the Dolphins and the Texans, and they added the 98th and the 99th overall pick. So I like it when teams make moves like that. Making like essentially doing a pick swap and then picking up an extra draft pick. I mean, they got, and that's like the, kind of the sweet spot of this draft was, in that top 100. They got 2 extra top 100 picks by moving down the board a little bit.
Yeah. And, I'm a little concerned that we're going to be too light on Genty, but we were at 13 overall right now on Ashton Genty in the underdog rankings. And, I could see us getting higher on him as we get closer, but just like very small changes in projected carries, projected touchdown rate, etc. These guys are very, very close here at the top between CMC, Brian Thomas, Neighbors, Nico Collins, etc. Okay. Let's go. Oh, there was so much speculation that the Raiders would take Shedeur Sanders. They had a ton of chance to take Shedeur Sanders, just said no thanks. And so, I thought it was just interesting that they repeatedly just said no thanks to the quarterback position until they did get to Tommy Millott, 213th overall, which I don't think is going to be a factor.
Should also note that Geno Smith is a part of this draft.
Yep.
Because the Raiders got him for the 92nd overall pick. So they got the two engines of their offense out of this draft, and Geno Smith and Ashton Genty. Oh, and I wanted to mention that, with those 98th and 99th overall picks, they drafted 2 offensive linemen. One of these guys, Charles Grant out of William and Mary. If you listen to like offensive line gurus, they think that this Charles Grant could be, he could be a starter. So they got 2 top 100 offensive linemen in those trades down. I think that John Spytek, the Raiders' new GM, did a really, really good job. I usually don't give the Raiders high draft grades, and that's turned out to be good or, accurate. But this year, I think he knocked it out of the park.
Okay. Speaking of knocking it out of the park, Chargers seem to have a really good draft. Evan gave them an A-. 22 overall pick was on Omarion Hampton, who we have a pretty strong projection on already out of the gate here. Yeah, up at 43 overall on Omarion Hampton right now. Evan, what'd you like so much about Chargers draft?
Well, again, we don't usually love it when teams go super aggressive at running back, but when you're a team that is built around running the ball, it makes a lot more sense. I mean, Omarion Hampton is going to give them a lot of touches. He's a big talent upgrade over Najee Harris, and just much more explosive. He's considered a pretty good pass protector already. So, I mean, I think that he should play right away. I don't know that he's totally going to ice Najee Harris out of the gate, but I mean, I definitely think that by midseason, by end of the season, Omarion Hampton is going to emerge as the Chargers' 1A back. He's just that more talented than Najee Harris. Trey Harris, number 55 overall out of Ole Miss. I think that he'll be given an opportunity to win that X receiver job with Ladd McConkey in the slot. And then Jamari Caldwell, they needed a space eater in the middle. Jamari Caldwell, 6'2", 332. And like he had some sacks. You don't usually see the guys that weigh like 330 plus getting many sacks in college, but Jamari Caldwell did show the ability to get to the quarterback at Oregon. And then Kyle Kennard in the 4th round, he has his critics, but he was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. He won the Bronco Nagurski Award, and they got him in the 4th round. So, like that, love the Chargers draft. I think they did a great job.
Yeah, I thought the Trey Harris pick was a good one for Ladd McConkey. It allows him to stay in the slot, right? And they've been searching for this X receiver spot for a while. Quentin Johnston, even when he's playing well, I don't think is a true X. Mike Williams, I think, might be on his last legs. And so I like the Trey Harris pick. Even if you don't like Trey Harris individually at 55 overall, I think it's a good thing for Ladd McConkey, who has an extremely high ADP here right out of the gate.
And they took chances on a couple more athletic pass catchers on day 3. We'll see how they go. I mean, day 3 guys, you never know if they're going to give you anything. But Keandre Lambert-Smith out of Auburn averaged almost 20 yards per reception last year, and he ran 4.37 at the combine. And then Oronde Gadsden, remember his dad played in the NFL. He's like an athletic catch-first tight end. So they knew that they needed to add some talent at the pass catcher position, and they came away with 3 guys.
Okay, let's go to the Miami Dolphins. Felt like Miami needed everything, right? And they go into the draft needing all kinds of positions. I could have even seen them taking quarterback. They did not do that. I could have seen them taking wide receiver, given the Tyreek Hill situation and his age. They did not do that either. 13 overall, they went with defensive tackle Kenneth Grant. End up with a D here from Evan. What'd you think about Dolphins draft seemingly gone wrong?
Yeah, I don't know that Chris Grier and really Mike McDaniel either. I don't know that they're going to be around too much longer. I mean, just the way that they executed their first 2 picks, I mean, they should have taken their offensive lineman in the 1st round because they wound up having to trade up for Jonah Savanea, and that cost them more draft capital. And this is not like a young team. This is one of the oldest teams in the league. You cannot really afford to give up draft capital. And then they didn't pick again until the 5th round.
Yeah.
After picking picking Savanea at the top of the 2nd, because they needed a left guard, and they're going to play Savanea, I presume, at left guard right away. Kenneth Grant, he was a really, really good college player. I'm sure he'll be a good player for the Dolphins. But, is he going to be a guy that can get to the quarterback in the NFL? I don't know. He's like a big, an immovable guy at like 330 pounds. And those guys don't technically rush the passer real well in the league. And then, again, they took like 6 guys on day 3, all dart throws. So I don't think they got better. They essentially got 2 guys out of this draft, and that even have a chance to start.
I know people are excited about Jalen Wright this time last year. Since then, they've added Alexander Madison, and they used a pick here on Ollie Gordon. Are you worried about Jalen Wright at this point for the Dynasty Bros?
Well, if you recall, one of the reasons that they didn't have a 3rd round pick this year was because because last year, to take Jalen Wright in the 4th round, they traded this year's 3rd round pick. And now, is Jalen Wright even going to make the team?
Yeah.
And they drafted Ollie Gordon, and Ollie Gordon does not fit the Mike McDaniel profile at all. He runs 4.61. Again, this was a confusing one, and I just don't think the Dolphins got better, and I think that the front office is going to get fired.
Okay. The draft that everyone's raving about, I mean, everybody, and Evan is as well, is the New England Patriots draft. Evan gave them an A. Almost everyone that I've seen talking has been like, Patriots had an amazing draft. I can't really disagree. They made a ton of picks here, including number 4 overall, Will Campbell. Evan, what did you think of Patriots Hall here?
It was funny. I was listening to known Patriots laundry enthusiast Greg Rosenthal whining about the Patriots drafting Will Campbell with their 1st round pick. And I'm like, what are you talking about, Greg? I mean, just sometimes when you're a homer, you can't see the forest through the trees. That's clearly the case with Greg Rosenthal when it comes to the Patriots. Will Campbell was an awesome pick at number 4 overall because you are trying to support your second-year quarterback, and you know that offensive line is an issue. And this dude has been like the best offensive lineman in college football for the last couple of years. He was obviously the best offensive lineman in this draft, and he's going to play left tackle for you. Travion Henderson was a great addition at 38. A lot of people thought that he could slip in. I mean, Daniel Jeremiah had him 22 overall to the Chargers, so they get a little bit of value there. They needed more juice in the backfield. I've always liked Ramondre Stevenson, but he fumbled way too much last year. You know, he has a tendency to incur ankle injuries, and he doesn't give you a ton of juice. Travion Henderson does. And then I really like this pick, Kyle Williams out of Washington State, an inside-outside player who can run. He separated. You know, like Matt Harmon really likes Kyle Williams, and I always like to hear that from Matt Harmon. And then Jared Wilson, you know, David Andrews is done, their longtime center.
Yeah.
Jared Wilson out of Georgia could be the Patriots starting center, you know, as soon as this year. Really.
Yeah, well, they signed Garrett Bradbury, but yeah, you know.
That's right. They gave him a 2-year deal that's really cheap. I think it's 2 years, $9.5 million.
Yeah.
But I think that Jared Wilson, like maybe by next year, if Garrett Bradbury will be easy to cut after this year.
Yeah, I'm super excited about the Patriots and Drake May. I mean, Drake May averaged 16.8 fantasy points per game in 11 rookie starts. You could have said last year he had the worst offensive line and the worst weaponry, and he still averaged 16.8 fantasy points per game. Now you get Bradbury, you get Will Campbell, you get Jared Wilson here, you add Kyle Williams, you add Travion, Steph Diggs hopefully will be healthy, Morgan Moses. So, I mean, things are looking up for Drake May, and I think one of my favorite sleepers right now would be Patriots pass game. And yeah, just to Evan's point, like, what do they think about Antonio Gibson and Ramondre Stevenson? Well, they used the number 38 overall pick on Travion Henderson. I think that speaks volumes for sure.
The Patriots are my favorite team, and I haven't looked at the win totals yet, but they're my favorite team to take a really big leap this year. Okay. Really big leap in terms of their win total. Mike Vrabel has always been a guy that maximized his rosters. Their defense on paper looks awesome. Their offensive line has been significantly supplemented. Drake May entering his second year. Now they have 2 backs that they can use. I mean, I think the Patriots can take a really, really big leap in 2025.
Yep. All right. Let's go to the New York Jets. Also got an A here from Evan. Did the Jets started off 7th overall with Armand Membu? I mean, their offensive line has been a mess for so long. I'm always fine with them adding offensive line help. Another A here, Evan. You're feeling I don't know, generous or more optimistic than I've seen you in these draft grades before. Go ahead on the Jets draft.
Well, up top, I gave out a bunch of Ds.
Okay.
So this was kind of a year where I remember thinking during the when I was writing it that I wasn't giving enough C's out. I was giving too many A's and D's. But yeah, the Jets got an A here. You know, Armand Membu and Olu Fashanu, who of course was their first round pick last year. I mean, that's your tackle tandem, ideally for the next 10 years, certainly for the next 5. And I mean, they could have the best tackle tandem in the league for the next 5 years. That's pretty sweet. Mason Taylor, tight end out of LSU, was a player that some people thought could go in the back end of the first round. In one of my mocks, I had him going 32 to the Eagles. That was contingent upon Dallas Goedert getting traded. None of the veterans got traded. But Mason Taylor, I mean, I think he can be a starter for them right off the bat. Azare Thomas, Florida State cornerback. He's a man corner. And that's what Aaron Glenn likes to play. You remember the Lions would play a ton of man coverage. Sometimes they pay for it. But opposite Sauce Gardner, you're cooking with some gas there. If Azare Thomas can live up to some of the expectations that have been surrounding him. And then another secondary addition, Alabama safety Malachi Moore. I think that he could be a guy that, starts sooner rather than later. He played both safety spots at Alabama, and he played slot corner. So he's really, really, really versatile player.
I mean, I was a little surprised they didn't try to get Justin Fields, a wide receiver, outside of this fourth round pick in Arian Smith. I know they didn't have a ton of picks, but still, they're going to go to this season with Garrett Wilson, of course, but then Alan Lazard, Josh Reynolds, Arian Smith, Malachi Corley. Like, you're not giving Justin Fields a ton here to work with. I did like the tight end pick, though. I think he feels a need for them quickly. But yeah, we're going to have a huge target projection here on Garrett Wilson, but major efficiency concerns here also for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, Arian Smith, he ran really fast at the combine, 4.36, but he's 179 pounds. So he's just going to be a situational deep threat. I just think they're going to run the crap out of Justin Fields. I mean, he should lead all quarterbacks in rushing attempts this year.
All right. Let's go to
He's going to be fun for fantasy, man. And if you remember when he played for the Bears against the Lions, he had monster rushing days against the Lions, and that's when Aaron Glenn was the Lions defensive coordinator.
I mean, we're at 92 overall in the rankings on Fields right now, and we're at 91 overall on Mahomes. And people are going to look at that and be like, how could you have Mahomes and Justin Fields back-to-back in the rankings? It's just for the point that Evan said. He's going to run like crazy. All right. Steelers got a B here from Evan. I thought the Caleb Johnson pick was fascinating. We could talk for days about that. But overall, Evan, what do you think of the Steelers draft here?
Yeah, I liked it. Gave him a B, as you said. They were often connected to Kenneth Grant before the draft. Kenneth Grant winds up going way earlier than people expected to the Dolphins at 13. And the Steelers stick and picked with Derek Harmon, who I think could be even better than Derek Grant at the same position. Cameron Hayward is entering his age 36 season, so they needed help up front. They never even considered Shedeur Sanders. Jerry Dulac, who I swear the Steelers just send him their draft board every single year, did a chat the day before the draft, and everyone was asking him oh, are the Steelers going to take Shedeur Sanders? And he's like, no. He got asked 8 times, and they were like, would they even take him in the 3rd round? And Jerry Dulac's like, no, they are not going to take Shedeur Sanders, and they did not take Shedeur Sanders. They did take Will Howard at 185 overall. And I think that he's worth a stab in the 6th round. He just won the national championship, and he can run. Yeah. But also DK Metcalf was a part of this draft because the Steelers gave up their 2nd round pick for him. And then, as you mentioned, so we had Mike Renner on the show before the draft, analyzing his running backs. He had Caleb Johnson at number 12 among running backs, but he gave the caveat that if Caleb Johnson is drafted by a team that runs outside zone, move him way up the rankings. And guess what? The Steelers under Arthur Smith last year ran the 2nd most outside zone in the league. So I'm pretty optimistic about Caleb Johnson emerging very, very quickly as the Steelers' workhorse. And then Jack Sawyer and Yaya Black. I mean, 2 Big Ten defenders who they can use up front. The Steelers put an emphasis on supplementing their defensive front 7 with Derek Harmon, Jack Sawyer, and Yaya Black.
Yeah, just to go back on the Caleb Johnson thing, I could not envision a better fit for Caleb Johnson than landing with Pittsburgh. He even drew Le'Veon Bell comps coming out of college during the process. At Iowa, they run this multiple tight end zone scheme. That's exactly what Arthur Smith likes to do. He fumbled 0 times on 262 touches. It's just feels like a Steelers back, feels like a Najee Harris type back. Caleb Johnson, even though everyone knew that he was going to run the ball, they had no offense other than Caleb Johnson. He still broke a ton of 20-plus yard runs. I believe he had the 2nd most 20-plus yard runs in the country behind only Ashton Genty. So I really like the landing spot for Caleb Johnson. I know everybody's making fun of me about my Jaylen Warren love, but as of now, I think Caleb Johnson is really likely to have more carries than Jaylen Warren this year and also handle red zone work for them. Other point on Steelers, like Evan mentioned, they do take Will Howard, but they're going into this offseason, and maybe they know something about Aaron Rodgers that the rest of us don't, and Aaron Rodgers is going to end up coming here. But they have Mason Rudolph, Will Howard, and Skylar Thompson are their 3 quarterbacks right now. So the assumption out there is that they're going to end up with Aaron Rodgers, but we'll see. Last AFC team to get to is the Tennessee Titans. Of course, had the number 1 overall pick and took Cam Ward as expected. Ended up with a B- from Evan. What do you think of Titans draft?
Yeah, I mean the Cam Ward pick by the end of the draft, I mean, by pretty early in the process, it became a formality. So good pick, whatever. I mean, you paid the price to get the number 1 overall pick by being terrible, and I mean, I think you did the right thing, because at one point there was buzz that they might take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter,
Yeah.
but they came to their senses, didn't even pursue quarterbacks in free agency, and took the best quarterback by far. I mean, and the NFL agrees with that, because another quarterback was not taken for 24 picks. And then who was the next quarterback after that?
Tyler Shuck, I believe.
That's right, at number 40.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, they did what they were supposed to do. So that's great. And then the Titans had the 35th overall pick. I like what Mike Borgonzi, their GM, did here. He had the 35th overall pick, and he traded it for 52 and 82. So that was their next 2 picks. They got 2 picks for the 1 pick, and they took a pass rusher from UCLA and Oladejo, and then Penn State safety Kevin Winston, who's an absolute stud, who might have flirted with the first round or been one of the first safeties drafted if he had not torn his ACL last September. They took a shot on Florida wide receiver Shamir DK at 103. He ran 4.34, an average over 18 yards per catch over his final 2 seasons, but he's 196 pounds. See, there were a lot of receivers in this draft that are sub 200 but can really run. And that's just kind of annoying, because those guys don't always project as anything more than situational deep threats. I also like the receiver that they took. I might like this receiver better.
Mm-hmm.
Alec Iominor,
Mm-hmm.
Stanford wide receiver. There's a bunch of highlights of him. We talked about him with Renner. He had a monster game against Colorado in 2023. And there's a bunch of highlights of him running past, beating Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
So I think he was definitely worth a shot in the 4th round. Some people have compared him to Robert Woods, which, that'd be a nice hit in the 4th round.
Oh, and he has a path, and so does DK. I think I prefer, from what I've seen, most people I respect prefer Iominor over DK also. But still, you're talking about Calvin Ridley, Tyler Lockett, Van Jefferson, Treylon Burks. It's not a difficult depth chart to pass. And if you think Cam Ward is a hit, then I do think Iominor is an interesting sleeper for people in those deeper dynasty formats. NFC, we'll start with the Arizona Cardinals. They got a B from Evan, one of the few teams that took zero skill position players in their entire draft. Evan, what do you think of what the Cardinals did over the weekend?
Yeah, I like it when teams go into the draft with a plan, that makes sense. And Monty Ossenfort, he's been ripping it up, I think, since he took over as GM. This is his 3rd draft, and he clearly had a plan here. We know that Jonathan Gannon has a really nice defensive scheme. The Cardinals will have moments where they're a league average defense over the last couple of years, despite having bottom 5 defensive talent. They had 7 picks here, and they took 6 players on defense. So they are very aware. Their internal scouting process is clear, and they're very aware of their own weaknesses. They got an absolute beast in Walter Nolan at number 16 overall out of Ole Miss, and he's just nonstop motor, interior disruptor, and he's going to be a lot of fun to watch playing for Gannon. Will Johnson fell a lot in the draft. People had him as high as 13 to the Dolphins.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, I heard an analyst predict that he would go 6 to the Raiders. But he didn't have the greatest final season at Michigan, and he's coming off a foot injury and something else. So he fell due to medical concerns, clearly.
Yeah.
But I mean, people can, there are people that considered him the best perimeter cornerback in the country over the last 2 years. Jordan Birch had 8.5 sacks in 10 games as a senior. He was the Cardinals' third round pick. And then they drafted two starters on the national champion Ohio State Buckeyes, and Cody Simon and Denzel Burke at linebacker and corner to round out their through the fifth round. So I mean, they knew what they needed, and they went in and they got it. And I think that they did a very good job.
If Will Johnson returns to the form that he had before all these injuries, it's going to look like a steal. The NFL has seemingly decided that he will not, right? Everybody passed on Will Johnson repeatedly, even though everyone 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, would have said he's a for sure top 10 pick. Didn't run the long speed I think people have concerns with, and then chronic injuries, not just like one-off injuries, but chronic injuries that could plague him for a while. So we'll see. It was a gamble, but at 47 overall, I think probably worth the gamble there on Will Johnson. We'll see if it pays off. Let's go to the Atlanta Falcons. Only made 5 picks in this entire draft. They got a D- from Evan. Go ahead on what the Falcons did here. They really bungled that trade, but yeah, go ahead on what the Falcons did here.
Yeah, I mean, I think they kind of got a steal in Jalon Walker at number 15 overall. I don't think that they necessarily expected him to be there. Everybody thought that he would go 8 to Carolina, and that knocked out a big need. I mean, their edge rush situation has been an issue for like literal decades. So, but then I mean, they got real greedy, really, really greedy. And they traded up into the first round for James Pierce. They gave up a first round pick next year.
Yeah.
James Pierce, he runs 4.47 at like 6'6", 250 or something. But he was like a real inconsistent player in college, and he had character concerns. That's why he was available at 26 despite freakish athleticism. So I mean, he's like far from a sure thing. And then Terry Fontenot, the Falcons GM, he gave up a 5th round pick next year to move up just 5 spots in the 3rd round to draft Xavier Watts. And I like Xavier Watts. He made a ton of plays at Notre Dame. Safety. But I mean, to move 5 spots and then you give up a 2026 5th rounder. I mean, it seems like you are closer. You think that you are closer than you are. And then he drafted another safety in Billy Bowman, who another pretty good prospect, 4.42, made a bunch of plays on the ball, but another safety at a position where you already have Jesse Bates. And they get penalized because they gave up the 77th overall pick for Matthew Judon, who isn't even in the league right now. So I don't like what they're doing. The Falcons, even last year, with the Michael Penix thing, look, I hope that Michael Penix plays well. And if Michael Penix does play well, then Terry Fontenot is probably going to keep his job despite making all these, process-based mistakes. But again, the process is just, it's very confusing.
Well, I hate giving up future first round picks when you are not already an established team. The Falcons, I don't like it generally, but definitely not when you're already an established team. What if Michael Penix is bad and the Falcons are bad and that first round pick ends up being in like the top 10 and then you give up a top 10 pick to get James Pierce? That's a disaster, right? So that would concern me for sure. And based on all of like the trade capital charts, the Falcons just got absolutely wrecked in that trade to move back in there to the first round. Let's go to the Panthers. 8 overall. They stick. Everybody expected them to take Jalon Walker, as Evan said. They declined that. Get Bryce Young some more weapons here. And Teteroa McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona at 8 overall, ended up with a solid A here. One of the best grades of the entire draft from Evan. Go ahead on the Panthers.
Yeah, this was a real fun draft. Yeah, everyone just assumed, myself included, that the Panthers were just going to go defense with like every single pick. Remember, they essentially got rid of their defense over the last 2 years and try to inject everything into their offense. They paid for those guards last offseason, and their offensive line looks great. But they started out number 8 with Tet McMillan, who I like it. And I know there was a time leading up to the draft where I thought that he was going to fall, and then it became clear to me that no, I don't think he's going to fall. I think that the Cowboys would have taken him at 12 had he been there, but the Panthers took him, and he's a 6'4" ball winner with elite ball skills. Draws comparisons ranging from Mike Evans to Drake London. I mean, that's a really intriguing sort of player with those kind of traits, and he helps Bryce Young. And then they started to hammer defense. They took back-to-back edges in Nick Scorton from Texas A&M, who I thought could maybe go to the Eagles at 32 at one point. I mean, he is a 3-down player. He dominated in the Big Ten at Purdue, and then also in the SEC at Texas A&M in his final season. I mean, so he dominated like in both conferences at a premium position. The Panthers traded up for Princely Uman-Millen, another edge player out of Ole Miss. They mixed in Trevor Etienne. I'm worried about Jonathan Brooks. Trevor Etienne is like a smallish sort of scat back, pretty good compliment to Chuba Hubbard, but I don't think that we're going to see Jonathan Brooks maybe at all this season.
They also signed Rico Dowdle in free agency.
That's right, and he's more of like the direct backup for Chuba Hubbard, whereas Trevor Etienne will be like their space back. And then they got Lathan Ransom, again, another dude who was an All-American starting safety for the national champion Ohio Buckeyes. And they got Cam Jackson in the 5th round, a massive dude, 6'6", 328 to play on the defensive interior. Mitchell Evans at Notre Dame was hurt too much to ever fulfill expectations, but he was a big recruit and was clearly talented when he was on the field. I love this draft and then a bunch of people like Jimmy Horn, the Colorado wide receiver, they got in the 6th round. I think that they absolutely smashed it. Dan Morgan did a great job, Panthers GM.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this a little bit on Friday, but along with Drake May, Bryce Young is one of my favorite sleepers at the quarterback position right now. Really came on down the stretch last year. I know they've made improvements on defense, but I'd still consider them a potential shootout team. And then he also gets Ted McMillan here as well. So yeah, I don't want to get too crazy on Bryce Young, considering we have a reasonable sample of him really struggling. However, those last 7-8 games last year, I thought Bryce Young was actually pretty good. Let's go to the Chicago Bears, Evan's hometown Chicago Bears. Got to be from Evan. I mean, they just keep getting Caleb Williams more. I mean, they keep getting Caleb Williams. First, they get the massive upgrade in coaching with Ben Johnson. Then in free agency and trading, they upgrade the offensive line massively. And now they use the 10th overall pick on Colston Loveland, 39th overall pick on Luther Burden. Like, you can see what they're trying to do. We're not going to make it so that Caleb Williams has any excuse but to play really well here going forward. Evan, what do you think of Bears draft?
I liked it. I mean, and included in the draft are Darrell Taylor, who is a rotational edge player for them. They got from Seattle last year because he wound up costing them the 185th overall pick. And then Jonah Jackson, who they got for the 202nd pick from the Rams. He's going to be their starting right guard. So those guys are included in the class. I think that Colston Loveland going ahead of Tyler Warren was surprising to an extent, but I get it with the Bears. They were looking for a little bit more dynamic seam stretching tight end. Colston Loveland is 6'6". It's funny. I heard him on the radio. He's like, Ryan Poles talking about him on the radio. And he grew up in Idaho, like dealing with like wire, like a lot of wire, because they have to put wiring around all the cattle, And so that's where he got his super strong hands, was from putting the wiring around the cattle on the farm in Idaho. Anyways, I've seen him get ripped for taking Luther Burden, and I totally disagree with that. I really like Luther Burden. I know that Lance Zierlein really liked Luther Burden. He thought he was the second best receiver in the class behind only Travis Hunter. And I think that Ben Johnson might see a lot of Jamison Williams in Luther Burden. And I understand now all of a sudden you have like a glut of skill position players, because you got Cole Kmet, you got Colston Loveland, you got DJ Moore, Romeo Odunze, Rome Odunze, and then Luther Burden. You got, I mean, this gives you flexibility in terms of your personnel packages. I don't think that, I would have super high expectations for Luther Burden in fantasy
Yeah.
anytime soon. But from a real life football standpoint, I mean, it was either Luther. I mean, they were going to enter the season with Olamide Zacchaeus as their third receiver. Now they have Luther Burden. Like, let's go.
Well, yeah. I mean, my take after they used the number 10th overall pick on Loveland, my take was that they'd play a lot of 2 tight end sets. And then it was like, oh, now they use the 39th overall pick on Luther Burden. Well, if we're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, maybe our third wide receiver isn't as much of a need, similar to the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles roll with total dust at the wide receiver 3 spot. So I get the criticism there, but just on raw talent, Burden's probably worth a shot there for sure. The other thing that we're going to mention, or we're going to talk about over the summer, is this DeAndre Swift vote of confidence. And, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, well, Ben Johnson hated DeAndre Swift. He also had Jahmyr Gibbs there as a rookie that year, I believe. And so, like, I don't want to say he definitely hates DeAndre Swift. Clearly, this was a vote of confidence. Were you surprised, Evan, that they did not take a running back until 233 overall? And I know this guy has some fans, but 233 overall, Kyle Monangai.
I just think they got sniped like 3 times.
Yeah.
Where the running back that they would have taken went like 1, 2, or 3 picks right ahead of them, and they just wound up not seeing the value there. And and that they clearly wanted Luther Burden to supplement the explosiveness that they have in their pass catcher core. I think it was fine. I think that we'll see them. I think they should maybe look at J.K. Dobbins. Dinkmeyer was suggesting that they should trade for Breece Hall. Dinkmeyer is a Bears laundry bro, so take it with a grain of salt. But then back to their draft, they drafted 6'8" offensive tackle Ozzie Trapillo. People thought that they might take a tackle at number 10 overall. They wound up taking a second rounder. He's 6'8" out of Boston College. He made starts at both tackle positions. So I think they'll look at him as a swing tackle initially. And then Shamar Turner, also in the second round. And they had 4 picks in the top 2 rounds. They got some really good players, and Shamar Turner's one of them. 3 technique defensive tackle at 290 pounds.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to Dallas Cowboys. So get a B+ here from Evan. 0 wide receivers in this draft, which was a surprise to me, given that their number 2 receiver right now is currently Jalen Tolbert. But got a strong grade here from Evan. Did the Cowboys what you'd like about what they did?
Yeah, the Cowboys, the reason that they have stayed relevant, I know they were terrible last year. The quarterback got hurt. But the reason that they've stayed relevant is because they draft really well. And I think that they had another good draft. They did not get that wide receiver we wanted, to see them take. But I think they got a lot of good players. Their offensive line is loaded now with Tyler Booker at guard. They've got a bunch of first-round picks invested in it. Donovan Ezeraku was a player who they got at number 44, who was widely considered to be a potential top 20 pick. Dane Brugler in particular was super high on their 3rd-round pick out of East Carolina, Siobhan Ravel. Dane Brugler was like, it would not have shocked me if he had gone in the top 30. But he had, he tore his ACL last September, so that wasn't going to happen. But if he had been healthy, he's like a first-round talent, big, physical press man cornerback. And then Jadon Blue, we talked about him with Field Yates before the draft. Hyper explosive. He scored 14 touchdowns last year on 176 touches. But he's a little bit undersized, and he had some fumbling issues. I think he's like a poor man's Devon Achane, Jadon Blue. This was a fun draft, I think, for the Cowboys, despite the fact that they did not take a wideout.
Yeah,
and I think that they would have taken Ted McMillan had he been there at 12.
So do I. And I will say, though, a sneaky winner from this draft is probably Jake Ferguson, right? I mean, he has to operate as effectively their number 2 target here. And there's also, I've seen some people speculating, go out and get Amari Cooper, right? Amari Cooper had some good years in Dallas. Obviously, he's a stone cold free agent right now. I'm worried he's totally cooked, but at this point, it might not be expensive for them to go out and get Amari Cooper either to help take some of the weight off CeeDee Lamb there in the pass game. Lions got a D plus from Evan. This trade, and you can go back on my Twitter. I highlighted some quotes from the GM about giving up a lot to move up for Isaac Tesla, who a lot of people did not expect to go here in the third round. I assume that's part of the D plus here from Evan, but go ahead on the Lions draft.
So here's the thing about the Lions. The Lions have had a lot of success under Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. We love Dan Campbell, okay? And we know that Brad Holmes is a freaking stud. I wouldn't mess with Dan Campbell. I wouldn't mess with either of those guys. I wouldn't mess with Brad Holmes either, and make fun of his Tesla pick either. So they've had a lot of success, but they have done it drafting not in line with consensus. And they, again, veered way away from consensus with this draft. No one had Tyleik Williams in their first round mock drafts. The Lions, who, they're considered to have a really good offensive line, they drafted guards with 2 of their next 3 picks. I think Tate Ratledge could be an early starter for them, but they took guards, and then they traded up for Isaac Tesla out of Arkansas, who had very, very little production at Arkansas. And I mean, it definitely could be a function of the Arkansas offense. You see 6'4", 214, tested off the charts. I mean, they're banking on his height, weight, speed, Isaac Tesla, but they gave up a bunch to get him. They gave up 2 third-round picks next year. So that doesn't fall in line with the way that my process works. Their process is obviously different from mine, and that doesn't mean you can't get good results with a process that differs from mine. They have gotten good results. It's just I would be going against the way that I believe to give them a good draft grade. I think that they're going to be a good team. They are a really good team. They're one of the best teams in the NFL, but I can't in good faith give them a good draft grade based on the way that they operate.
When you give up 2 future third-round picks to move up to take this kid so far off consensus, you need to be so sure that you're right. So sure. And no one should be that sure. No one should be that overconfident that they're right. And so, yeah. And also, you could have maybe stayed where you were and gotten Tesla 70 picks later. That was a possibility also. And so that would be bad process for sure, too. They strike me as just like tape bros. Like, they don't care what anyone thinks. They're just like, these are our evaluations. We don't really care. These are the guys that we want. And it is what it is. And so far, it's worked for them, for Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, for sure. But yeah, I could not disagree with Evan's D plus here on the Lions from a process perspective. Let's go to the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay Packers break a 20-plus year streak of not taking a wide receiver in round 1. Take Matthew Golden at 23 overall. End up with a C here from Evan. What'd you think of Packers draft?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are excited about the Matthew Golden pick, but I'm with you that I'm kind of like a little bit more lukewarm on it. That 4.29 has been disputed. I mean, Renner explained that Golden, he goes to the combine, he runs the 4.29, does not run again, which kind of like, because usually run 2.40s, which indicates that, oh my God, he was like shocked by it. And then when they do the play-by-play or the simulcast or whatever they call it, it didn't look like he was running faster than a guy who ran 4.4. And then he didn't run at all at his pro day either. So I think he just saw the 4.29. He was like, all right, we are not running again. We're standing on the 4.29. The production was a little above average maybe at Texas. And then in the second round, they took a big power player, left tackle for North Carolina, Anthony Belton. We'll see where he ends up. Savion Williams, who they took in the third round. The Packers need wide receiver help. Matt Harmon does not like this Savion Williams kid. And so that's a red flag to me. And a couple edge players in Colin Oliver and Baron Sorrell in the 4th and 5th rounds. It just, I don't know what to think about this draft. I don't love it. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. I'm in the middle on it.
Sneaky fantasy winner from this draft, I think, is Marshawn Lloyd, who I know I took too much of last year, but got completely derailed by injuries. Like, literally never even had a chance. Was just like hurt the entire offseason and then through the regular season. But they have not added anything at running back, and they did not draft anything at running back here either. So yeah, just want to highlight Marshawn Lloyd there, who we are way above consensus, way above ADP on in the initial best ball ranks. Let's go to the Los Angeles Rams, who did not make a first round pick as they are wont to do. Ended up with a B- grade here from Silva, as they only made 6 picks once again. Evan, what do you think of Rams draft?
Yeah, I mean, they started off by acquiring that first round pick of the Falcons for 2026 by moving from 26 to 46. You drop 20 spots and you get a first rounder in 2026. I think that's well worth it. Terrence Ferguson, I think, wound up being the consensus number 3 tight end in the draft. An amazing athlete, high level production, set all kinds of school records for receiving production at Oregon. I think that this is kind of the tight end maybe that, the Rams have been looking for since they took a shot on Gerald Everett. They've drafted mid-round tight ends, but they really poured an investment into this one. And I think that he can add a new dimension to the Rams passing offense if everything comes together for Terrence Ferguson. The Rams they hammered a strength. They have really focused on building their defensive front seven, and they hammered a strength by going with Josiah Stewart out of Michigan, edge player up front, and then Jarquez Hunter, who ran 4.44 coming out, made a bunch of big plays at Auburn. Calls into question, what are we doing with Blake Corum? They used a third-round pick on him last year. He really could not get on the field. I don't think that they're going to end up – I know that they love Kyron Williams. His contract is about to be up. But I do wonder, does this Jarquez Hunter pick reflect poorly on Blake Corum after his rookie season was largely non-existent?
Oh, I think so. I mean, signs have not been good on Blake Corum at all. And yeah, it's hard to keep Kyron Williams ranking down because he projects for so much work and so much red zone work does Kyron Williams. So it's hard to keep his ranking down. But man, I feel like they've been looking for a guy to give Kyron Williams a little bit of snaps off, but I'm not sure if they found it with Blake Corum, and I'm not sure they're going to find it with Jarquez Hunter either. So we're going to end up pretty high, I think, on Kyron Williams here, regardless, for this season at least. Let's go to the Vikings. Only made 5 picks in this draft. Did get more offensive line help with Donovan Jackson at 24 overall. Got a C- from Evan. Go ahead on the Vikings draft.
Well, the Vikings were working with very little draft capital to begin with because they made a bold move up the board for Dallas Turner, who I think that they'll be looking to for a breakout this year. He's a really young player coming out. And then they traded their 5th-round pick for Jordan Mason. So they did not have a ton of draft capital to start. And so it's hard to give teams that don't have a lot of draft capital really good draft grades. They'd really have to knock every single pick out of the park. It's just how it goes. I do love their build, their approach here, because they're completely remaking their offensive line. They drafted Donovan Jackson, a stud mauler out of Ohio State, to play left guard after signing Ryan Kelly to play center and Will Fries to play right guard in free agency. They needed that because their interior offensive line, their tackles are great, Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill, but their interior offensive line got mauled, got pushed around way too much last season. That's not going to happen with these guys this year. And then it's just they took a shot on another one of these guys that, weighs 183 pounds and runs 4.37, but he plays wide receiver and he weighs 183 pounds, and Ty Felton. Those guys are not always great bets, in the 3rd round. And then Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, Georgia defensive tackle, is a 276-pound defensive tackle, just kind of like a tweener. So, you couldn't have had super high expectations because of the capital that they were working with. I do love what they're doing on the interior O-line, though.
Yeah, and Jordan Mason is, of course, part of his class, too, as Evan mentioned here. I believe it was something like, a very late pick, but still, Jordan Mason, part of this class as well. Saints. Oh boy. So the big pick is the Tyler Shuck pick at 40 overall. I'm curious if you think he is how likely he is to make starts this year and what you make of the whole Derek Carr thing. But Saints did end up with a C plus here from Evan. I think it's just like a total rebuild for the Saints right now. And what they've been needing to do for the last, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4 years or whatever it's been, is just rip it up and start from the bottom. It feels like this is finally the beginning of that this offseason is. But yeah, Evan, go ahead on Saints draft.
Yeah, I sent Underhill my write up after I did it, and he like agreed with it. So it got the sign off from the Saints beat writer. Kelvin Banks. It's going to be interesting to see where he fits, because he was a left tackle at Texas. Some people thought he needs to move in to play guard. The Saints' biggest weakness right now is at right tackle. Trevor Penning, you don't want him starting anymore. But also Talise Fuaga didn't have a great season at left tackle. They could move him to the right side and start Kelvin Banks at left tackle. I asked Underhill about that. He said he doesn't know. They're going to figure that out when they figure it out. Tyler Shuck, Underhill thinks he's going to start like week 1. The Saints loved him. And they made him the 40th overall pick. We knew that he was really high on their board. I think that they might be like soft tanking for Arch Manning, who, by the way, according to the betting market, is the favorite to be the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft.
Yeah, I mean, the Carr. Some people are out there saying that the Carr injury thing isn't real. Like, he doesn't want to play for the Saints anymore. I don't know if I'd go that far, but yeah.
Well, the fan base hates him. Yeah. I mean, they are vicious. They hate Derek Carr, and I mean, he's got to know that.
Yeah. So, and I do think like Kellen Moore, obviously former quarterback, handpicked Tyler Shuck. I think Kellen Moore thinks Tyler Shuck can play. So I want to see Tyler Shuck make starts this year. I think it'd probably be an okay thing for Olave and Shaheed here, but we'll see how this goes in the offseason with Derek Carr.
Yeah.
Really,
I think it might be like a Davis Mills situation where they just start, and Tyler Shuck could easily be better than Davis Mills.
Yeah.
But, where they just kind of give them the whole season. And if they wind up losing a bunch of games, so be it. Then we can get our quarterback in 2026.
What do you think about Devin Neal versus Kendra Miller? Do you have a take there? Because, we've spent probably too much time talking about Kendra Miller on this podcast. But, yeah, you think Neal takes over as Kamara's direct backup?
Probably. Kendra Miller, he just pisses off coaches because, yeah. I mean, I think that his conditioning and his off-field habits are just not, pisses coaches off. I mean, you remember Dennis Allen would like call him out in the media, and so Dennis Allen is gone now.
Yeah.
But I mean, the coaching staff that drafted him is not there anymore. That's never good for a guy who has shown no production. Yeah, I would actually bet on Devin Neal over Kendra Miller.
Okay. Let's go to perhaps Evan's most controversial draft grade, which is the New York Football Giants. Got a D- from Evan. Now, everybody else, including myself, thought it was pretty strong, at least at the top, getting Abdul Carter and Jackson Dart here. Evan disagrees. Go ahead on probably your most controversial draft grade here, Evan. D- to the Giants.
Well, I was really down on the trade up for Jackson Dart. And then I saw Jackson Dart's mom. Did you see Jackson Dart's mom?
Yes.
Yes. All right. No,
she's not Luca's mom. I mean, Luca's mom
I haven't
was
seen
more
Luca's mom.
Yes, you need to find Luca's mom. But yeah, no.
All right, so Abdul Carter was a no-brainer. I'm not going to give him points for just taking the guy that we knew all along that they were going to take. And then so they didn't really give up that much to go move up for Jackson Dart. They gave up a 2025 and a 2026 third-round pick to move up 9 slots for Jackson Dart. There was nothing to me that indicated, number one, that Jackson Dart wasn't going to be there at 34, where they moved from. I think that he easily could have been there at 34. And then there's really – I didn't hear anybody that was like bullish on Jackson Dart being like a year one starter. And this regime with Joe Shane and Brian Daboll is in its last year, I believe. It should already be over. So then if that's the case, then you are moving on to next year with a new regime and a new offense, Jackson Dart, with a regime that didn't draft him, and you signed Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. I understand that neither is a long-term solution, but is Jackson Dart going to help you in year one? I like no. And they got some decent players. I mean, Darius Alexander, I think, is probably a starting caliber defensive tackle. Their defensive line looks freaking loaded right now. They didn't even trade Kayvon Thibodeau, who was the subject of trade rumors. And I love Cam Scatterbo. And Marcus Mbow, tackle out of Purdue. Some offensive line analysts think that he can grow into a starter. So I mean, they got some decent players. It's just that trade. I mean, I just think it's a disaster. It's not going to help them now. And if everybody gets fired, which I assume that they will, then Jackson Dart is going to be like a lost cause with a new regime that didn't trade up for him, didn't draft him, etc.
Yeah, I mean, we thought that they were all going to get fired this year, right? And they didn't. So maybe they can survive if they show some spark, if they show something, and they can say, and you know what? Jackson Dart's also ready to play now. Or maybe Jackson Dart gets like the final 4 starts of the season and he looks good, and they can roll that into next season with some momentum. And I think that's like the best case scenario.
If he starts the final 4 games, that probably means that Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen are getting fired.
Maybe. Or maybe they just go to Jackson Dart, and because Russ and Jameis can't cut it, But yeah, if you have conviction about the quarterback position, I like trading up, and they didn't give up that much if they think that this kid can be a franchise quarterback, But
yeah, I mean, the odds of like the number 25 overall player as a quarterback becoming a franchise quarterback are not very good.
Yeah. The Cam Scatterbo pick, they took him over Dylan Sampson. Obviously, it seems like a better fit, Scatterbo, next to Tracy than I guess Sampson would have been. But yeah, what do you think about Tyrone Tracy in the backfield now? Because a lot of people are saying Tyrone Tracy, one of the biggest fantasy winners coming out of the draft,
really?
even though they took Scatterbo.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that Tyrone Tracy is going to be like the complimentary back, and Cam Scatterbo could lead them in carries.
Okay.
And get all the goal line stuff, and he can pass protect, he can catch. I think Cam Scatterbo could be the touches leader for the Giants like easily this year. I think that Tyrone Tracy is a loser.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think that's going to be a bit against consensus, but yeah, it's going to be one to watch for sure, that split between Tracy and Scatterbo. Let's go to the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. You're not going to believe this, Evan, but they got a Alabama/Georgia player who slipped too far in the first round. And it's not rocket science. Howie's just like sitting back there catching punts, and this time it's Jihad Campbell at 31 overall. Now, they did have to trade up to get Jihad Campbell one spot. They seemed like maybe they thought the Chiefs were going to take him. I don't know. End up with a B- from Evan here. What do you think of Eagles draft?
Yeah, and they, Jihad Campbell, they must have absolutely loved him because they moved up just one spot with Kansas City. Kansas City wasn't going to take him. That was a weird move.
Yeah.
By Howie Roseman. Howie Roseman usually runs laps around the league and like every offseason activity.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that some other team
was
offering for the Chiefs, and they wanted Jihad Campbell.
It's got to be that. Either way, they got a stud. Jihad Campbell, super, super productive. He's a 3-down player. They really have started to emphasize, it's funny, safety and linebacker more in recent years when they just punted those positions for years. And I think that they've kind of changed their approach, which I appreciate. Speaking of which, they took a safety, Andrew Makuba, at in the second round, 5'11", 186, a little bit undersized, but he ran 4.45, and he played cornerback as well in college. So he's got that versatility, and I trust Howie Roseman at this point to draft defensive backs. And then they picked up a 2026 fifth rounder from the Falcons. The Falcons just love helping all the other teams. They sent a 2026 fifth rounder in that deal where the Falcons only moved up 5 slots in the third round. Ty Robinson, Nebraska defensive tackle, was a freak athlete at the combine, had 7 sacks as a senior. Drew Kendall, Boston College center, is the son of Pete Kendall, who played a ton of years in the league. Pretty solid draft. I wasn't blown away like we all were last year, but pretty solid draft, I think, for the Eagles.
And one thing that didn't happen in this draft was Dallas Goedert getting traded. And it seems like they were mega open for business. And I'm just like a little surprised that not only did they not do it, but they also didn't draft a single tight end here also. So
you know what? Good. Because Dallas Goedert's good.
And we can say the same thing about Mark Andrews. And Mark Andrews got another vote of confidence. Mark Andrews and Dallas Goedert, maybe some of the speculation that they'd be cut or traded has fueled their ADP to decline. I like taking those guys, around pick 100. I believe we have them, something like that, 110 for both of them. Let's go to 49ers, got a C- here from Evan. Obviously, a lot of turnover in the 49ers organization over the last 12 months or so. Evan, what do you think about what the 49ers did?
They had a very clear-cut approach. Over the last 2 years, the 49ers defensive line, really their defensive front seven in general, which was one of the best in the league, has really deteriorated due to injuries and free agency losses and everything else. They really prided themselves a couple years ago on having a massive rotation, especially on the D line. So what they did here is they took 4 of their first 5 picks were used at edge, defensive tackle, or linebacker. And I think that they got some pretty good ones. I mean, Mykel Williams was a stud. At Georgia, they took him 11th overall. He was really hot late in the process. Alfred Collins and C.J. West to help against the run. Remember, their run defense really fell off last year. They took a chance on 5'8", 181-pound corner, Upton Stout, out of Western Kentucky with the 100th overall pick. He played boundary in college. He'll almost certainly have to be a slot corner in the NFL. They took Jordan James in the 5th round. He's a guy worth discussing. I think that Isaac Guerendo, just a better talent, but we'll be monitoring that camp battle behind Christian McCaffrey. Is important because of Christian McCaffrey's injury issues.
Yeah, and Christian McCaffrey is about to be 29 years old, coming off Achilles and knee issues. I mean, I love Guerendo. We were talking last year about Guerendo as one of the biggest size speed freaks. Ended up being a pretty big hit relative to cost, I think, for Dynasty Bros. But yeah, I'm interested in Jordan James for sure. I should note that Jordan James was Renner's number 5 running back in this class, and Jordan James was Dane Brugler's number 7 running back in this class. Obviously, Jordan Mason is gone. But yeah, we've seen guys, and if you could say, oh, Jordan James is slow, he's not that talented, whatever. Kyle Shanahan's made it look good with a lot of different running backs that maybe don't have the best measurables out there for sure. Let's go to the Seattle Seahawks. Got a clean A. One of the best grades from Evan went to these Seattle Seahawks, who had 4 picks in the top 92 of this draft. Evan, what'd you like so much about Seahawks draft?
Oh, man, I think that they crushed it. They started off with Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, who was the best offensive lineman at the Senior Bowl. He's going to jump in at left guard right away. They had major issues on their offensive line interior, and he's a ready-made starter, I believe. I thought that he could have gone as high as number 10 to the Bears. They got him at 18. Nick Emanwari, the safety out of North Carolina, is a freak athlete, and Mike McDonald can do some really creative things with his secondary players. I think that you could draw some comparisons from Nick Emanwari to Kyle Hamilton, who Mike McDonald had in Baltimore. Elijah Arroyo, I think that Seattle is going to move on from Noah Fant.
Yeah.
In all likelihood. They used the 50th overall pick on Elijah Arroyo, tight end out of Miami. I love the Jalen Milroe pick. I never really bought the first round hype, but I definitely thought he could go in the second round. I understand that he's not a great passer. I totally get it. But you can build your offense around a guy who is that dynamic of an athlete at the quarterback position.
Sure. And guys can get better throwing. I mean, Jalen Hurts came into the league people
absolutely
were on it. And
you can get better. Lamar Jackson has gotten better.
Yeah, sure.
And Sam Darnold, like we saw him have a really nice season last year. There are no guarantees that he's any kind of a franchise quarterback. So
No.
it just made a ton of sense uh, to draft Jalen Milroe there in 92nd overall. And then Riley Mills, he was a leader type at Notre Dame. He got hurt late last season, and his absence was noticeably felt along the Notre Dame defensive line. And then Torrey Horton, Colorado State wide receiver. Matt Harmon loves this guy, thinks that he could be a steal in the 5th round. So Seattle has Jackson Smith and Jigba and Cooper Kupp who win on the interior. They need a guy outside. They have Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but we've seen we've seen his ceiling, and Torrey Horton can win on the exterior. Really nice flyer there in the 5th round.
And speaking of winning like down the field, Elijah Arroyo can win down the field. I put out some highlights of Elijah Arroyo, who, as Evan said, went 50th overall. Noah Fant is set to count $13.4 million against the cap. A lot of people speculating that Noah Fant is going to be gone. They'll go with AJ Barner and Elijah Arroyo at tight end. So yeah, definitely a guy to watch there for the deeper tight end stuff. Let's go to the Tampa Bay Bucks. Yeah, we talked about this Egbuka pick a while on Friday. Definitely surprising at 19 overall. End up with a C- here from Evan. Thoughts on Bucks draft?
Yeah, Jason Light has done a really, really good job. So I'm not here to rip on him or criticize him or anything. And Emeka Egbuka is going to be a good player in the NFL. So I understand it. It's just like that was kind of a sweet spot to potentially draft a pass rusher. And I think the Bucks needed to get an edge rusher, some pass rush help. They wound up taking 2 shots on pass rushers in the middle rounds at a small school, Central Arkansas, David Walker, and Southern Methodist, Elijah Roberts. But those guys are no guarantees to contribute in the middle rounds. I just think that they could have used that pick a little bit more wisely. But I do think that Emeka Egbuka is going to be a good player for Tampa Bay. In the 2nd round, Benjamin Morrison, who missed almost the his entire final season at Notre Dame due to hip surgery, he would have been a 1st round pick if not for that injury. He was incredible in 2023, and they took another corner. They doubled down on corner and edge. Here they took Kansas State cornerback Jacob Parrish, who ran 4.35 in Indianapolis. So, and then they took the flyer on Tez Johnson late in the 7th round, who, I guess he probably won't even make the team. He'll be on the practice squad or something. But, they didn't have a ton of draft capital, and they got some good players. It just didn't, not a draft that's going to blow you away.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough on the Egbuka stuff, right? Normally, we're pretty high on round 1 wide receivers. Our initial ranking on Egbuka comes in at 115 overall. We have Mike Evans at 31 overall, Chris Godwin at 76 overall, Jalen McMillian's at 111 overall. So, there's going to be a bit of a battle, I think, between McMillians and Egbuka out there to get snaps, but it's just really, really crowded. I mean, even at running back, Bucky and Rashad White and Sean Tucker, I mean, it's just crowded. And even though we expect them to be a really good offense, it's going to be a bit frustrating, I think, for the Egbuka stuff, at least out of the gate. Last team to hit in draft grades, Washington Commanders only made 5 picks in this draft. Still got a B here from Evan. I guess there are veteran players that are part of this draft also via trades for the Commanders, but go ahead on their draft, Evan.
Yeah, Laramie Tunsil, Marshawn Lattimore, and Deebo Samuel are all part of this draft. Laramie Tunsil, obviously one of the most talented left tackles in the league, and then they pair him with Josh Connerly out of Oregon. I thought he could have gone a little bit higher even in the draft. They get him at 29. There's your left tackle and your right tackle. You're set. As of this time last year, really, Washington probably had. Remember, everyone had them at the bottom of their offensive line rankings entering last year. They wound up being okay, but they realized that they needed talent injections, and they got that. I mean, they've got a really nice looking tackle tandem now, and they can move Brandon Coleman, who had a nice rookie year, into guard. So this was what I thought was interesting about Washington's draft. That they did multiple things that upgrades two positions. So drafting Josh Connolly allows Brandon Coleman to move inside to guard. Drafting Trey Amos, Ole Miss cornerback, allows Mike Sainristil, who was kind of stretched playing outside last year as a rookie, had a nice year, but he was always a slot corner. He gets to move into the slot. So you upgrade your boundary cornerback and your slot cornerback with the Trey Amos pick. And then Jalen Lane ran 4.34 at 5'10", 191, and was a super dynamic punt returner in college. So again, the Commanders are kind of different from most teams this year. They didn't have a lot of draft capital, so you have to include the veterans in there. But I do like what they did with their draft capital, improving multiple positions with single selections.
Yeah, they didn't address running back until the 7th round with a guy that Renner really liked in Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, but that's a 7th round pick. We're not going to project much volume for him whatsoever. And so we're going to be out in front, at least from a volume perspective, on Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler here, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable, especially on Eckler, who's just like really getting up there in age, I think. But yeah, good run out for both B-Rob and Eckler this offseason from a usage perspective. All right.